Yo, I'm just trying to make pimping my stuff a little bit more fun. So I have a YouTube channel, which is where you're probably watching this. That's Postmortem Video. I have a second channel called Grimstream. It's not got the proper name yet, but if you search for it, you should find it. And if you're trying to stop sucking at the teat of YouTube, you can always head on over to BitChute and find me at GrimJim. I pride myself on being fair, listening, trying to understand the other point of view, all the rest of it. I've reached the end of my tether when it comes to Brexit. I haven't quite reached the end of my tether when it comes to Trump, but I want you to follow along with me and to just consider that the orange man might genuinely be bad. There's a question I like to pose to people. If you had to have someone malicious, even evil, in charge, would you rather that they were competent and evil or incompetent and evil? Would you rather have a stupid malicious person in charge or an intelligent malicious person in charge? People say things like, oh, I'll say what you like about Hitler, but at least the trains ran on time, that sort of thing. That is a competent evil. An incompetent evil, if you'll pardon the use of the term evil, would be someone like Trump or Boris Johnson. They don't really know what they're doing, but they're in charge and they have malicious intent. And the hope that we have is perhaps that they screw up while they're doing it. So just have that in the back of your mind. To those of us outside the US, Trump is in many ways the stereotypical American. He's brash, he's uncouth, he's loud, he's kitsch, tasteless. He has this undeserved sense of superiority over anyone and everything around him, and he expects everything and everyone to bend to his will, and for his every word to be hung on, even when he's contradicting experts or whatever else. He is that kind of touristy American that we see in a lot of museums and so on here, commenting far too loudly on things, invading people's personal space, that sort of thing. He is that kind of stereotype. So it's hard for a lot of people from outside the US to understand why you would elect such a horrendous stereotype. Not that we can talk so much anymore. Yeah, I understand the appeal, though, to an extent. You know, the system is corrupt, it's unresponsive, it doesn't represent everyday people, it doesn't even consider everyday people. And when the whole system's corrupt and hard to understand, hard to get along with, it's very easy to fall prey to the idea that you just want to smash it all down and start over. You know, upending the apple cart. But upending the apple cart can go one of two ways. If you just upend it into the street, there's just apples everywhere. Nobody gets any apples. They all get dirty. Nobody gets to eat them. Maybe the rats make off with them. Whereas if you upend the apple cart into a pie factory, you get some nice apple pies at the end of it. The temptation is there, but you just need to do it the right way, I think. Now, the old elections back in 2016, there was a lot of hyperbole, a lot of nonsense, claims that Trump was a fascist or whatever else it might be, and I'd caught a lot of flack simply for saying the man's an idiot, but he's not a Nazi. You know, that you should criticize him for things that he is. You should point out his actual flaws and not go after him at these kind of absurd levels. Even lost friendships and social media followers overtaking that line that he's fucking terrible, but he's not Hitler. That was enough to upset some people for some reason. So that was a bad criticism, and not everyone who voted for Trump was a racist. There are nationalists, there are isolationists, there are people who bought in to the American dream storyline and have been taught effectively to look up to billionaires simply because they have a lot of money, and the assumptions that go along behind that. Condemning everybody as deplorables wasn't particularly helpful either. See, this was all bad criticism. Yeah, he was uncouth. Yeah, he was an outsider, but these were his strengths, so criticising him for them didn't really work particularly well. and it just further alienated the people who were supporting him. Now, I have, up until this point, been a fairly strong advocate for trying to listen to the opposing point of view on Brexit and so on, but at this point I feel that all the lies, all the nonsense has so fallen away that there is really no scope left for forgiveness or understanding when it comes to that problem, lest anyone accuse me of hypocrisy. When it comes to Trump, however, there is still room for some forgiveness and some understanding, and facing this election, you should probably not just write off anyone who supports Trump as a Nazi or a racist or a deplorable or whatever else, because a lot of these people aren't. Unlike the situation over here, to a large degree, a lot of people who supported Obama ended up also supporting Trump, and I think that's an important thing to take note of. There are good things about the Trump presidency. Some of these may not sound like it, but they are. Trump is off to such an extreme in one direction that when the pendulum swings back, America might well become a more civilized and modern country. In the backswing against Trump, whether it comes now, unlikely, or in another 4 to 5 years, more likely, then you might see America become a modern Western nation with a decent social safety net, better education, better healthcare, all the rest of it. But it might be that American society needs to swing this far towards Trump and the far-right extreme of the Republican Party before it can swing back the other way and people can come to understand that there is political mileage, economic mileage and social mileage in the opposite direction. Another positive thing about Trump is that he may have forced everyone to consider the needs of the working class, in particular the white working class in America. Hillary Clinton didn't even bother to talk to them, didn't even bother to appeal to them, and over here in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn didn't do a great deal of appealing to people in a similar position, people who have indeed been left behind, people who feel marginalised, who feel under attack, poor, ignored, and in no small part this racism that we see is being bred by resentment because these people are constantly being attacked and blamed for everything when they know from their own lives that they're having a hard time just as much as anybody else. So to have the blame for the oppression of black people or gay people or trans people, whatever else, heaped upon them as well, to have that contempt heaped upon them while they're also at the bottom of the stack, or at least towards the bottom of the stack, is intolerable. And simply by talking and making promises, however empty they might have been, Trump forced attention back on to this neglected area, this issue of economic justice. I think that the progressive left, really the regressive left, have put the cart before the horse, putting social justice ahead of economic justice. I think you start with legal justice, you progress to economic justice, and then afterwards social justice just kind of falls into place naturally. But they put social justice ahead of economic justice, and I think that is where we see a lot of the problems and a lot of the tensions coming out. So if Trump has drawn attention to and made people pay attention to and make promises to the working class, the underclass that has been left behind, I think that's a good thing. I also think he has knocked the wind out of the regressive left, which means there is a space for a more serious left to emerge. Sanders is not one of the woke progressive left. He tosses them a bone from time to time, but he is really the face of the progressive movement, as was in the States. He has a much more old school left position, I think, though he's only centre left from a European perspective, of course. But he's not part of the woke scolds, really. You know, he will allow himself to be deplatformed in certain cases. He will pay lip service to it, but I think he is much more focused on economic justice, which is a betterment for everyone rather than social justice. But I do think that Trump's ascendancy and power has knocked the wind out of the worst elements of the left. made them look ridiculous, disempowered them to a large extent, at least when it comes to the political machine, not so much education or social issues. Trump has made apparent the problems in the existing system, the problem of not using the popular vote for the presidential elections. And he's even drawn attention to the corruption problems within the democratic primary process, as has Sanders. These are good things moving forward. He's also shown that the checks and balances in the American political system have failed, that they have been corrupted, that someone who egregiously breaks the laws and the conventions while president cannot be held to account in the current system. All of these problems, all of these issues are out of whack, and it has also emboldened the worst elements of the American right and made them be more obvious and visible. You would have no Trump if your system worked properly, or he would have been successfully impeached if the system had worked properly. So the fact that he hasn't been held to account demonstrates that there is an issue. The fact that the checks and balances that are supposed to be there in the system have broken down. That's a valuable thing to know and understand moving forward. Those are the good things. I know many of them seem perverse, and many of them seem like a reaction to Trump, but that's just the way it is. So the bad things. Trump has brought America and the American presidency into disrepute. He has no dignity. He doesn't know how to conduct himself diplomatically. As someone who's supposed to be good at making deals seems to run counter to that. America is a laughingstock to the rest of the world. And I'm saying this as Britain, which has become a laughingstock to the rest of the world as well. To operate effectively, diplomatically, internationally, to operate on the world stage, relies on a lot of give and take, a lot of politeness. It's unfortunate, but etiquette is important in this context. He has none of it. So he is beneath the dignity of the position, the leader of the free world. He's an unsuitable person for it. These are just the facts. I know it's fun to kick everything over and watch people go scurrying and try to cope and deal with it, but do you really want to be seen that way by the rest of the world? I know a lot of nationalists will say they don't care and fuck you if you don't like it, but the world is interconnected. There's no escaping the fact that you have to deal with and understand other people, that you have to play the game to an extent in order to get the good things that you want for your country, in order to avoid conflict, in order to secure trade, in order to secure alliances, in order to keep the peace. Trump has none of that. He's basically been running, luckily, on the intimidation factor of the US, but that's not a long-term strategy. There's the cronyism. His family all have positions. He's enriched himself using the position of president. He's enriched his family using the position of president. Other presidents, vice presidents and so on may have done the same. That doesn't excuse him from doing it. This isn't a thing that should happen. This is why there is the emoluments clause, which is probably what he should have been brought up on impeachment for. Or, the assassination of a legitimate member of a foreign government by drone strike. These are the things that should be concerning. Instead, they went for something more esoteric, harder for the public to grasp hold of, and so they failed on that. But he is running a corporatist, cronyist White House, and I think anyone can see that. It's just whether they excuse it or not, and I don't think it's excusable. I don't think it's excusable whoever was doing it. If there's any fire to the smoke around the Bidens, they too should be held to account, just as Trump and his family should be. It has, the Trump presidency and the lead up to it has shown how dangerously political the Supreme Court in the US has become. This should be a body that is above party politics, above government. It should be made up of people chosen for their neutrality and their legalistic interpretation rather than their moralistic interpretation or their politically lensed interpretation. I wouldn't want a dyed-in-the-wool Republican or a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat to be on the Supreme Court any more than I would a dyed-in-the-wool Marxist, or a dyed-in-the-wool libertarian, or objectivist, or feminist, or whatever else. They should be there to understand and interpret and contextualize the law as written, not to try and get certain political, moral, or ethical stances written in. That is the job of the parties when they hold power. It's the job of the governments, not the Supreme Court. But there was all this delay and essentially filibustering over Obama getting to pick a person to go on the Supreme Court, and then there was the forcing through of a candidate in a highly politicized campaign under Trump, and he's likely to get another one in, particularly if he wins re-election. And that's going to have a long and scarring effect on the US because it's become politicized. How you walk that back, I don't know, but it is a problem. It is a huge issue. All the appointments of judges are. The rule of law just doesn't seem to apply to Trump. You know, he was impeached, proper witnesses, proper evidence wasn't examined. He got away with it. He has been handing out pardons that are controversial, to say the least, and seem to be about playing favours, playing favourites, not about whether there's justice or a miscarriage of justice. Obama's forgiveness seemed to be much more even-handed and much more justice-based than Trump, where it seems to be more about who's his friend, who's done favours for him, than anything else. When it comes to the economy, people like to talk up Trump. They'll point to the stock markets. Most people don't have shares. It's completely irrelevant to most people. It shows that corporations are doing well, that the very rich are doing well. It doesn't show how the swathe of normal people are doing well. Some people will point to his tax cuts. They primarily cut taxes for the rich. And for the middle classes and others, you may have less tax month by month, but you also don't get that big rebate that you used to be used to. And a lot of people relied on that rebate to pay for certain things, like upkeep on their house or, you know, back rent, things like that, to get their head above water again for the next year. And so, while you might be paying less month on month, the lack of that rebate has really screwed up a lot of people's lives. And he's added a huge amount to the deficit and blown $1 trillion hole in the budget. Fortunately, his next budget is unlikely to go through, because that would increase the damage. The thing is, it's not all bullshit, the ideas that the right has around tax and spend. Paradoxically, reducing tax can increase revenue to government and thereby allow more reinvestment. But that only really happens if you do it around the more economically active segments of society. That is, people who get money and spend money. You know, people who churn it over more and more. Very rich people don't have to actually spend that much money to maintain a high lifestyle. So a lot of that money and that economic activity is relatively stagnant. Whereas people lower down the totem pole in society, if you give them some money, they immediately spend it and use it, and it becomes economic activity, and then that drives revenue to the government. He cut taxes at the high end when the economically productive thing to do would have been to cut taxes at the low end. But here we all are. Most people don't understand economics, and that includes most economists. It's voodoo, it's unpredictable, it's like the weather. You can make very short-term specific predictions, you can make very long-term general predictions. Anything else is pretty much chaos. But we do observe some general rules, and those suggest that the economy is in deep trouble, and he has massively increased the deficit. I think it's doubled since 2015, something like that. Something to consider. Then of course there's all the broken promises. He made all kinds of promises to the white dispossessed working class of the American Rust Belt and so on, and it was good, like I said, to bring attention to them, but he hasn't followed through. He's often made things worse for those people in those situations. Are they savvy enough to understand and to blame Trump for not following up? I guess we'll see this election season, but I worry that they're not, and that the blame will continue to be heaped on foreigners and immigration and so on, and that they won't hold him to account for these broken promises. A lot of what Trump does seems to be based on revenge. He seems to be seeking to undo Obama's legacy rather than to do anything positive of his own. And there are comparisons between the two. Obama came in with great promises of hope and change that were not followed up on. And I think there's still that appetite for change that Obama cashed in on but didn't pay out on. Trump's done the same thing. Will he get a second term like Obama did? Perhaps. Are people less patient? Probably. Would Sanders be a better fit for the kind of hope and change that people on both sides have wanted? A fairer society, a fairer shake and so on? I think he probably would be. I mean, far from agreeing with him on everything, and he's only centre-left from a European perspective, but he seems to be the better bet. But a president who's driven by pettiness and revenge and wanted to get his own back on people that humiliated and laughed at him, these are not good motivations to be the leader of a country, let alone a superpower. You know, that's a concern. If we look at Trump and how he acts, for all the holidays and breaks and so on that he takes, for all the work that he hives off to other people, it does seem to be affecting his health, particularly his mental health. It's like he's slowly falling apart before our eyes, almost. Some of that's probably diet, some of that's probably stress, but he does seem to slur his words, misread his words. By all accounts, his reports are a picture and a few words. You know, he doesn't seem to be able to take stuff in. He doesn't hold facts. He contradicts himself more than the Bible does. If he ever was an effective person, a leader, a businessman, if he ever was an effective deal maker, he certainly isn't now, and he seems to be hopped up on prescription medication half the time, and on downers from prescription medication the other half of the time. I think it's a concern, and you don't want someone that unstable with their finger on the button or at the levers of government. Fortunately, I think it's not really him running much, but that also leads me into the last problem. Trump is a sideshow. He's a distraction. He's a clown making balloon animals while the genuinely sinister people are working in the background doing genuinely sinister things. You know, you can point to Trump and say, oh, he made this faux pas, he did this stupid thing, oh, he went on another Twitter rant or whatever. But left to his own devices, he would not be very effective. It's the people around him and behind him who have genuinely malicious objectives and who are competent that are really running the show. And Trump, if anything, is a distraction from that, so people are missing it. So I think the Orange Man genuinely is bad. He's not a Nazi, he's not a fascist. He'll probably fade away if he does lose the election. It's his followers I'd be more concerned about. And otherwise, I think if he does get a second term, once that's up, he'll be out anyway. But he is bad. He's just not this hyperbolic level of bad that people want to paint him to be. Just consider. Postmortem Studios, role-playing games, and a lot more to die for. post-mort.com.
You anything you want. You just have to talk to me. Talk to me. Talk to me. Talk to me. I'm your priest. I'm your shrink. I'm your main connection to the switchboard of souls. I'm the magic man. The Santa Claus of the subconscious. You say it. You even think it. You can have it.